You're a single mom paying with coins for groceries. And the billionaire behind you just froze. She stood at the checkout, her hand shaking as she counted dirty pennies just to buy medicine for her sick child. The crowd behind her sighed in disgust, and the store manager was about to throw her out on the street. But when the wealthy man behind her looked into her cart, his face went completely pale. He didn't just stop her, he dropped to his knees right there on the wet floor. Why did a man who makes millions a day lose his mind over a poor mother's pocket change? Well, she didn't know it yet, but a priceless family secret was hiding right next to the loaf of bread, a secret that would change her life forever. To see how this emotional story unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now. And before we start, drop a comment below and let me know which city or country are you watching this from. Let's get into the story. The autumn wind in Chicago was always unforgiving, especially in the late afternoon when the sun hid behind the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district on the Lower East Side, far away from the glittering penthouses. The streets were lined with old brick buildings and the constant hum of the elevated train. In one of these modest neighborhoods lived Cindy, a 28-year-old single mother, and her 4-year-old son, Leo. Every single day followed the exact same strict rhythm, a routine built entirely on survival, hard work, and quiet resilience. Cindy worked at a local commercial laundry service located 6 blocks from her small apartment. Her shift began at 7 o'clock in the morning, long before the rest of the city fully woke up. The laundry room was always hot, filled with the thick scent of detergent. Heavy steam from the industrial presses and the endless roaring sound of washing machines. Cindy's job was to fold heavy bed sheets and hotel linens for hours without stopping. It was exhausting physical labor that left her back aching and her hands dry and rough, but she never complained. She kept her head down, focused on her work, and maintained a polite, gentle demeanor with everyone around her. Her only motivation, the single light in her challenging life, was Leo, because she could not afford expensive daycare. An elderly neighbor named Mrs. Gable watched Leo during the day for a very small fee. At precisely 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Cindy would finish her shift, punch her time card, and walk quickly to pick up her son. The walk home was always her favorite part of the day, no matter how cold the weather was. Leo would hold her hand tightly, his small fingers wrapped around her rough palm, talking endlessly about the drawings he made or the birds he saw outside the window. Cindy would listen to him with a genuine warm smile, completely hiding the immense exhaustion that weighed down her shoulders. Their home was a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building. The radiator in the corner often made loud clicking noises, and the wallpaper near the kitchen window was peeling. But Cindy kept the space remarkably clean and organized. A small wooden dining table sat in the center of the kitchen, with 2 chairs facing each other. On the mantelpiece in the living room sat a single, neatly framed photograph of a young man in a proud military uniform. It was Cindy's late husband, a brave soldier who had passed away 2 years ago. Every evening after entering the apartment, Cindy would look at the photograph for a brief second, drawing silent strength from his memory before starting her evening chores. Dinner was always a simple affair. Cindy would prepare a small bowl of warm oatmeal or vegetable soup for Leo, sitting across from him and watching him eat with a look of pure maternal devotion. She often told him stories to keep his spirits up, creating worlds where heroes were kind and hard work was always rewarded. Leo would listen with wide, innocent eyes, completely unaware of the heavy burdens his mother carried on her own. After dinner, she would wash the dishes, sweep the small floor, and tuck Leo into his bed under a thick blanket to keep him warm against the drafty windows. Only when her son was fast asleep would Cindy finally sit down at the kitchen table, pull out a small leather notebook, and begin the difficult task of facing reality. She opened the worn pages to look at the neat columns of numbers she had written down over the past month. Beside the book lay a clear plastic jar, half filled with shiny copper pennies, silver nickels, and dimes. This was her emergency fund. The thin line between having a roof over their heads and being thrown out onto the cold Chicago streets. Every night, Cindy counted the coins one by one, her fingers moving silently so she would not wake Leo. The math never lied, and lately, the numbers were becoming terrifying. The rent for their small apartment had gone up the previous month, swallowing almost her entire first paycheck. Her wages at the laundry service remained exactly the same, not increasing by even a single cent. She calculated the cost of electricity, the small fee for Mrs. Gable, and the bare minimum needed for food. When she finished the subtraction, the remaining balance was dangerously close to zero. The fragile normal of her daily life was beginning to show deep, worrying cracks. On her way home that afternoon, she had noticed that the soles of Leo's only pair of winter shoes were completely split open, letting the freezing rainwater soak his tiny socks. When she tucked him into bed, she felt his forehead and noticed he had a slight warm fever and a persistent dry cough. The apartment itself was freezing because the building's old boiler had broken down again, and the landlord refused to fix it until the following week. Cindy wrapped her old woolen shawl tightly around her shaking shoulders, staring at the cold radiator. She was doing everything right, working as hard as a human being could, yet it felt like she was drowning in a river of hidden problems. She looked over at the plastic jar. She needed to buy fresh milk, bread, a small box of children's pain relief medicine, and some healthy vegetables to make a warm broth for Leo's fever. She knew her small debit card only had a few dollars left on it, not even enough to cover the medicine. Cindy poured the contents of the plastic jar onto the wooden table. The coins made a loud clinking sound, and she quickly pressed her palm against them to quiet the noise. She began sorting them into small stacks of $1 each. There were many pennies stained with dirt and age, and a few worn quarters. It was a deeply humbling moment for a woman who possessed so much personal pride. Cindy had never asked for government assistance, and she had never begged for a single handout in her life. She believed in honest work and earning her own way, just as her late husband had always done. But looking at the small mountains of copper and silver on her table, she realized she had no other choice. She carefully swept all the coins into a small, heavy velvet pouch that her husband had once used to keep his personal belongings. She pulled the drawstring tight and placed it inside her jacket pocket. Tomorrow, after work, she would have to go to the big supermarket down the street and use these coins to buy Leo's necessities. She closed her notebook, put her head down on the hard wooden table, and prayed for the strength to get through the next day. When morning arrived, the sky was a dull, heavy gray, and a bitter sleet was falling across the city. Cindy pushed through her 8-hour shift at the laundry service with a heavy heart, her muscles aching more than usual from the cold. Her mind was entirely focused on Leo, who was resting at Mrs. Gable's apartment with a worsening cough. The moment the clock struck 4, Cindy hurried out into the freezing rain, her shoes soaking through within minutes. She picked up Leo, wrapped him tightly in her own oversized winter coat, and carried him directly toward the bright, neon-lit neighborhood supermarket. The supermarket was packed with evening commuters filling their carts with expensive groceries, fine meats, and bottles of wine. Cindy felt out of place as she pushed a small metal cart down the brightly lit aisles. She kept her movements precise and intentional, choosing only the absolute essentials. She picked up a gallon of whole milk for Leo's growth, a single loaf of cheap white bread, a few carrots and potatoes for a warm soup, and finally, a small bottle of children's fever medicine from the pharmacy section. Every item she placed into the basket felt heavy with financial anxiety. She checked the price tags multiple times, doing the mental math over and over again to ensure it did not exceed the small amount she had. When she reached the front of the store, the checkout lines were incredibly long and moving slowly. Cindy chose the line with the fewest people, standing behind a woman buying a mountain of gourmet food. Leo stood inside the front basket of the cart, shivering slightly, his cheeks flushed from the fever. Cindy rubbed his small arms to keep him warm, whispering soothing words into his ear. Behind Cindy, the line quickly grew. A tall, sharply dressed older man in a tailored charcoal coat stepped into the queue directly behind her. It was Mr. Budiono. He looked at his luxury gold watch, tapped his leather shoe impatiently on the polished floor, and let out a loud, irritated sigh. He had $1 million business merger to finalize, and being stuck in a grocery line was the last thing he wanted. Finally, it was Cindy's turn. The young cashier scanned the 4 items with a bored expression. The digital screen displayed the total balance due. Cindy took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She pulled out her plastic debit card from her worn wallet and swiped it through the card reader, holding her breath. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the front of the store. The screen flashed a bright red message: "Transaction declined. Insufficient funds." Cindy felt the blood rush to her face, her ears ringing with sudden shock. "I am sorry," she stammered to the cashier, her voice shaking. "Could you please try it one more time?" It should have just enough. The cashier sighed heavily, swiped the card again, and the exact same red warning appeared. The people in the line behind her began to murmur impatiently. Cindy felt a wave of absolute desperation wash over her. She could not leave without the medicine and note for her sick child. With trembling hands, she reached deep into her jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy velvet pouch. She loosened the drawstring, poured a massive, chaotic mountain of pennies, nickels, and dimes onto the conveyor belt, and began counting them one by one under the judgmental eyes of the entire store. Cindy felt a burning wave of intense shame heat her face, contrasting sharply with the freezing rain that still clung to her hair. Her fingers were stiff from the cold laundry room, making it incredibly difficult to separate the tiny copper pennies from the silver dimes. One nickel slipped from her grasp, bouncing off the plastic counter and rolling away across the clean floor. $1, $1.25, $1.30, Cindy whispered under her breath, her voice cracking with emotion. She did not dare to look up at the cashier, whose expression had turned from bored to visibly annoyed. The cashier tapped her long fingernails loudly against the cash register, letting out a sharp, dramatic breath that everyone in line could hear. Behind her, the murmurs grew louder and more aggressive. A man farther back in line spoke up, his voice filled with irritation. "Are you serious right now? Some of us have families to feed and places to be. This isn't a bank." Cindy felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She wanted nothing more than to drop everything, grab Leo, and run out of the glass doors into the blinding rain. The humiliation was heavy, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. But she looked down at Leo. Her small son was sitting quietly in the grocery cart, his eyes glassy from the fever, holding his little hands together to stop them from shaking. He was counting on her. She was his only protection in this cold world. Gathering every ounce of her remaining dignity, Cindy forced her hands to stop shaking. She ignored the whispers, the staring eyes, and the heavy atmosphere of judgment filling the front of the supermarket. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her sleeve and continued to stack the coins in neat groups of 10. $2, $2.50, she continued, her voice firmer now, rooted in a mother's fierce love. Directly behind her, Mr. Budiono crossed his arms tightly across his chest. He checked his gold watch yet again. 5 minutes had already passed, and this woman was still counting pennies. He felt a surge of deep impatience. To a man who dealt in millions of dollars every single day, watching someone count pocket change felt like an absolute waste of his precious time. He stepped forward, his sharp eyes fixed on the back of Cindy's worn jacket, ready to speak up and harshly demand that she move aside so the rest of the world could move on. He was about to tell her that if she could not afford basic groceries, she should not be taking up space in a busy store. But just as the cold words formed in his throat, his gaze accidentally shifted downward, moving past Cindy's shaking hands and landing directly inside the metal grocery cart where Leo sat. What he saw sitting right next to the loaf of bread made him freeze completely, the words dying instantly in his mouth. Inside the metal grocery cart, resting against the plastic bottle of children's medicine, was a heavy, gleaming silver medal attached to a faded blue and gold ribbon. It had tumbled out of the velvet pouch when Cindy hastily dumped her coins onto the counter. Mr. Budiono stared at the object as if he had just seen a ghost. The air in his lungs vanished. His sharp, impatient expression melted into one of pure, unadulterated shock. He took a slow step closer, completely ignoring the complaining customers behind him. His eyes remained locked on the silver medal. He recognized the distinct shape, the heavy weight of the medal, and the specific engraving pattern on the back. It was a military medal of valor, an incredibly rare honor awarded only for the highest acts of bravery under extreme fire. But what made Mr. Budiono's hands suddenly begin to tremble was the small, distinct scratch across the left side of the eagle crest. He had seen that exact scratch before, years ago, on a dusty battlefield halfway across the world. For a moment, the loud noises of the supermarket, the beeping registers, the murmuring crowd, the cold rain hitting the glass windows, all faded into absolute silence. A powerful memory rushed back to him. He remembered the deafening sound of explosions, the suffocating heat of the desert sun. "Ah!" and a young sergeant who had tackled him to the ground, shielding him from flying shrapnel. That young man had saved his life, allowing Mr. Budiono to return to American soil, build his massive real estate empire, and live out his days in wealth and comfort. The young soldier had never returned. Mr. Budiono had spent years employing private investigators to find the soldier's family, wanting to repay a debt of life that money could hardly cover, but his search had always turned up empty. Now, in a random grocery store on a freezing evening in Chicago, that very same medal was sitting in the cart of a poor, shivering single mother who was humiliatingly counting pennies to buy basic fever medicine for her sick child. "Excuse me," Mr. Budiono said. His voice was no longer sharp or impatient. It was low, thick with heavy emotion, and barely above a whisper. Cindy flinched, expecting him to shout at her for holding up the line. She kept her head down, quickly pushing another small stack of coins toward the cashier. "I'm almost done, sir. Please, just give me one more minute." "Where did you get that?" Mr. Budiono asked, pointing a shaking finger toward the cart. He stepped even closer, his tall, imposing figure completely overshadowing her. "The medal. The silver medal next to the milk." "Where did you get it?" Cindy instinctively grabbed the medal and pulled it tightly against her chest, her eyes wide with sudden fear. She had brought it with her as a last resort, intending to pawn it at the antique shop down the street if the coins were not enough, though the thought broke her heart. Seeing this wealthy, powerful man demanding answers, she felt deeply threatened. "It belongs to my family," Cindy replied defensively, her voice trembling but fierce. She stepped between Mr. Budiono and Leo, shielding her son from the stranger. "It is none of your business." Mr. Budiono's intense reaction, combined with his sudden movement toward Cindy's cart, caught the attention of the store's security guard. From across the aisles, the guard saw a wealthy man confronting a poorly dressed woman holding a valuable-looking silver object. Assuming the worst, the guard quickly unclipped his radio and began power-walking toward checkout lane 4. The atmosphere at the front of the store grew incredibly tense as the heavy boots of the security guard clicked loudly against the polished floor. The customers who had been complaining just moments before went dead silent, stepping back to watch the drama unfold. Cindy felt her heart drop into her stomach. She held the silver medal tighter against her chest, her knuckles turning white. "Is there a problem here, sir?" the guard asked, his eyes moving critically from Cindy's worn wet winter jacket to the expensive charcoal coat worn by Mr. Budiono. He immediately assumed Cindy was the source of the trouble. Before Mr. Budiono could manage to calm his racing thoughts and speak, the impatient cashier pointed a finger at Cindy. "She's holding up the entire line trying to pay for groceries with dirty pocket change." And then this gentleman noticed that valuable medal in her cart. "It looks highly suspicious." The guard looked at the massive pile of pennies and nickels scattered across the conveyor belt, then at the gleaming silver medal in Cindy's trembling hands. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the line right now," the guard commanded, his tone firm and unyielding. "We don't allow people to cause scenes or create disturbances at the registers. Furthermore, I need to know exactly where you obtained that military item. People don't just carry valuable medals around in grocery carts." "It is mine," Cindy cried out, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and fierce indignation. She felt a burning sense of injustice twisting in her gut. She was a hard-working citizen, a grieving widow, and a mother trying to protect her sick child. Yet because she was poor, she was automatically viewed as a criminal. "My husband earned this. I didn't steal anything." Leo, terrified by the guard's loud voice and the aggressive stance of the adults around them, began to cry. He reached his small arms out toward his mother from the front of the grocery cart. Mommy, I want to go home," he sobbed, his small body shaking violently from the combined effects of his fever and panic. "Step away from the cart, ma'am," the guard repeated, taking a step forward and reaching out his hand to grab Cindy's arm to escort her toward the back office. "Don't touch me," Cindy shouted, backing away defensively. She refused to let them treat her like a thief in front of her son. She had done nothing wrong. The conflict was spinning completely out of control, fueled by the prejudices of the store staff who only saw her poverty and assumed she had no right to own anything of true value. Mr. Budiono watched the guard reach for her, and a sudden wave of fury washed over him. The shock that had frozen him moments ago transformed into a powerful need to protect the woman standing before him. He stepped directly between the security guard and Cindy, using his tall, imposing frame to block the guard's path. "Stand down immediately," Mr. Budiono ordered, his voice echoing through the front of the supermarket with absolute authority. The guard blinked in confusion, hesitating because of Mr. Budiono's wealthy appearance. "Sir, she's the one causing the issue," I said. "Do not touch her, Mr. Budiono repeated, his eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. But the situation was already out of his hands as the store manager, alerted by the noise, came rushing down the main aisle to intervene. The manager, a short man with a sharp suit and a stern expression, pushed his way through the gathering crowd of onlookers. He looked at the blocked register, the crying child, and the pile of copper coins scattered across the conveyor belt. "What is going on here?" the manager demanded, adjusting his glasses. He looked at Cindy, his eyes narrowing as he took it over her jacket. "Ma'am, you were causing a massive disturbance in my store. Look at this line. You are disrupting our business operations." "I am trying to pay for my food," Cindy said, her voice shaking as she tried to maintain her composure. She held Leo's small hand tightly, trying to soothe his crying. "I have enough money in coins. I just need the medicine and the milk for my son." The manager looked down at the pile of pennies and let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "We are a premium grocery store, not a bank. We do not have the time to sit here and count thousands of dirty pennies while paying customers are forced to wait. Or what is that in your hand? A silver medal?" He looked at the security guard, then back at Cindy with an expression of deep disgust. "An item like that does not belong to someone like you. It looks stolen. I cannot allow you to cause a scene and possess suspicious goods in this establishment." Cindy felt her world crashing down around her. This was her absolute lowest point. She was standing in a brightly lit room surrounded by dozens of strangers, yet she had never felt more isolated, helpless, and completely defeated in her entire life. She looked around the circle of faces, but nobody stepped forward to defend her. They only stared at her with pity, indifference, or judgment. Her pride was shattered into pieces. She had spent 2 years working herself to the bone, skipping meals, and fighting to give Leo a good life. But today, society was telling her that she was nothing. Worse than the humiliation was the crushing realization that she was failing her son. Leo was still crying, his little forehead burning against her hand. If they threw her out now, she would have no food, no medicine, and no way to help him through the freezing night. All hope seemed to vanish into thin air. The system had decided she was guilty simply because she was poor. The manager stepped closer, his face cold. "Guard, escort this woman and her child outside immediately, and confiscate that silver item until the police arrive to verify its ownership. We are banning her from this store permanently." The security guard nodded and reached out his hand again. Cindy stood frozen, her eyes filling with tears as the dark reality of her failure closed in on her. She had no money, no power, and no friends in this massive city. She looked down at the medal in her hand, the last beautiful memory of her late husband, and felt an overwhelming wave of despair. It felt like the end of everything. But as the guard's hand came closer to her arm, something shifted inside Cindy. The deep sorrow in her heart suddenly transformed into a fierce, blinding spark of motherly protectiveness and unyielding pride. She looked at Leo's tear-stained face, and then she looked at the cold, arrogant eyes of the store manager. If she walked out now in silent shame, she would be letting them win. She would be teaching her son that they were small, that they were worthless, and that his father's memory was something to be confiscated like a common piece of trash. Instead of backing away or crying out in fear, Cindy made a big, courageous decision. She stood tall, straight as a pillar, and pulled the silver medal away from the guard's reaching hand. She did not hide it. Instead, she stepped forward and held the gleaming silver medal of valor high up in the air, right under the bright fluorescent lights of the supermarket checkout, forcing every single person in the crowd to look at it. "Do not touch me, and do not touch this medal," Cindy declared, her voice ringing out across the front of the store. It was no longer a shaking whisper. It was a powerful, commanding sound that filled the room with absolute authority. The sheer dignity in her stance made the security guard freeze in his tracks. "You think I stole this?" Cindy said, staring directly into the manager's eyes, her gaze fierce and unwavering. "This medal belongs to Sergeant First Class David Miller. He earned it on the battlefield. He was my husband, and he died serving this country 2 years ago. I am not a thief. I'm a widow, and I am a mother." The crowd gathered around the register gasped. The impatient murmurs instantly died down, replaced by a heavy, stunned silence. The manager blinked, his face turning slightly pale, as the weight of her words hit him. Cindy turned her gaze back to her cart, her voice filled with raw, heartbreaking emotion. I came into this store today because my son has a fever and our apartment has no heat. I counted every single penny I have because I refuse to beg and I refuse to steal. I brought this medal with me because it is the most valuable thing I own, and I was prepared to sell it at the pawn shop just to buy a bottle of medicine. I am willing to give up my husband's greatest honor to keep his son alive. She looked around at the silent crowd, her chin held high despite the tears finally streaming down her face. So go ahead, call the police, check the name engraved on the back. But I will not let you treat me like a criminal for trying to feed my child. It was a heavy, high-risk choice. By revealing her identity and holding her ground, she was exposing her deepest wounds to a room full of strangers, inviting either total ruin or salvation. But she stood there, proud and undefeated, a mother defending her family's honor. Directly behind her, Mr. Budiono felt a physical jolt go through his entire body when he heard the name David Miller. The final piece of the puzzle fell perfectly into place. His breath hitched in his throat and tears welled up in his own eyes. He knew exactly what he had to do. The store manager stood paralyzed, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, unable to find words after Cindy's powerful declaration. The security guard slowly stepped back, his face flushing with deep embarrassment. Before anyone else could move, Mr. Budiono stepped forward, bypassing the guard completely. He did not look at the manager or the crowd. His focus was entirely on Cindy. To everyone's absolute astonishment, the wealthy billionaire, a man known throughout the city for his ruthless business mind and immense pride, slowly dropped to his knees right there on the dirty, wet supermarket floor. He looked up at Cindy, his hands shaking, his voice thick with uncontainable emotion. "You are David's wife," Mr. Budiono whispered, a tear escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. "And this beautiful boy is his son." Cindy stepped back, utterly confused and defensive. "Are you? How do you know my husband's name?" The crowd leaned in, completely captivated by the sudden shift. Pembaka, Kira, the reader thinks, Mr. Budiono is just a random, arrogant billionaire who was suddenly touched by a poor widow's tragic story and decided to do a random act of charity. Ternyata turns out, Mr. Budiono is actually the anonymous veteran billionaire who has been desperately searching for the family of the brave young soldier who sacrificed his life to save him on the battlefield years ago. Karena Siakavel, because from the very beginning, Silver Medal of Valor, sitting in Cindy's grocery cart, carried a very specific engraving on the back. It was engraved with the exact platoon and unit number the 9th Infantry Division. Stay's late husband, Sergeant David Miller, is the young soldier who had thrown his own body over a wounded captain, Budiono, during an unexpected ambush, shielding him from a deadly blast. Captain Budiono survived, returned home, inherited his family's real estate firm, and became a billionaire. However, due to a massive military bureaucratic error and a fire that destroyed the platoon's records, David's hometown address had been lost, leaving Mr. Budiono with no way to find the family he owed his life to until this exact moment. "Your husband saved my life, Cindy," Mr. Budiono said, his voice ringing clearly through the silent store as he stood up, wiping his eyes. "He was my sergeant. He shielded me from an explosion. I am alive today, building my companies, because David gave everything for me. I have looked for you for 2 long years." The supermarket was dead silent. The cashier's mouth hung open. The store manager looked as if he wanted the earth to swallow him whole, realizing the immense mistake he had just made. Mr. Budiono turned his head toward the terrified manager, his voice instantly turning cold as ice. "You are fired," he said firmly. "And as for this store, my company owns this entire shopping plaza. Effective immediately, your contract is terminated for treating a hero's family with such disgusting disrespect." He then turned back to Cindy, his expression softening into pure warmth. He pulled out a sleek black titanium credit card from his wallet and handed it to the stunned cashier. "Got everything? Buy the whole pharmacy, if this boy needs it. Load a new cart with the finest food in this store." He gently looked at Leo, who had stopped crying and was staring at the kind older gentleman. Mr. Budiono smiled warmly at Cindy. "Your days of counting coins are over, Cindy. David's family will never suffer again. Please, let me take you and my sergeant's son home." The transition from that freezing, humiliating evening at the supermarket to their new reality happened with life-changing speed. Mr. Budiono kept his promise completely. Within 24 hours, Cindy and Leo were moved out of the drafty, broken-down apartment and into a beautiful, warm house in a quiet and safe neighborhood. Mr. Budiono hired the best doctors in the city to treat Leo's fever. Within days, the little boy was running around the living room, healthy, laughing, and wearing brand-new winter shoes that fit him perfectly. Cindy no longer had to endure the exhausting, endless hours at the commercial laundry service. Instead, Mr. Budiono established the Sergeant David Miller Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting the families of fallen soldiers and single mothers who were struggling to survive. He placed Cindy in charge as the director, giving her a meaningful, well-paying career where her natural resilience and empathy could help hundreds of other people who were going through the same dark times she had once faced. A month after that fateful evening, a special ceremony was held at the Foundation's new headquarters. The room was filled with gentle light, warmth, and supportive people. On the main wall, in a beautiful, prominent display case, sat the Silver Medal of Valor, polished and gleaming under a soft spotlight. Right next to it was the small, heavy velvet pouch and a clear glass jar containing the exact copper pennies and silver nickels Cindy had counted on the supermarket conveyor belt. Cindy stood before the crowd, looking elegant and confident in a simple navy blue dress. Leo stood right beside her, holding her hand proudly. Mr. Budiono sat in the front row, clapping with a deep sense of peace in his heart. He had finally repaid his debt of life, ensuring that his savior's legacy would live on through the prosperity of his family. When it was Cindy's turn to speak, she looked out at the audience with a calm, steady smile. Her voice was clear, natural, and touched the heart of everyone in the room. "We often look at people who are struggling and judge them by what they lack," Cindy said softly, her eyes glancing briefly at the jar of coins. "We see poverty, and we assume defeat. But true honor, true strength, and dignity are things that money can never buy, and poverty can never take away. My late husband taught me that service and sacrifice are the greatest values a human being can possess. And Mr. Budiono reminded me that kindness and gratitude can bridge any gap in this world." She paused, looking down at Leo, whose eyes were bright with happiness. "To anyone who is currently sitting at a kitchen table, counting coins, and wondering how they will survive tomorrow, do not lose hope. Keep your head high, work honestly, and guard your dignity fiercely. Your silent sacrifices are never invisible, and light will always find a way to break through the darkness." The room erupted into warm, emotional applause. Cindy stepped down from the stage and was immediately wrapped in a tight hug by Leo. As Mr. Budiono joined them, sharing a moment of deep familial respect, the memory of the cold Chicago rain faded entirely, replaced by the enduring warmth of a legacy honored, a debt repaid, and a mother's love rewarded.